The San Francisco 49ers are just a couple days removed from saying Brock Purdy is their future at quarterback. I mean, over the top, almost effusive praise of Purdy. Kyle Shanahan said that he wants Purdy to be his quarterback as long as he's coaching with the San Francisco 49ers. And when you hear that, you're like, oh, that sounds phenomenal. But even still, after listening to all the praise that was heaped on Brock and everything that, seems to point towards the 49ers getting a deal done with Brock, Chris Sims, who happens to be Kyle Shanahan's best friend, and Mike Florio seem to believe that the negotiation is going to be a lot more difficult than it is coming across. And Chris Sims, real harsh on Brock. Take a listen to what he had to say right here.
This is not going to be easy. And we know the 49ers like to play hardball. They do. And they're not going to do anything fast. They'll take their time to try to get a better deal. We saw it with Brandon Ayuk last year. We've seen it with others. We saw it with Deebo Samuel, right? They do not, and this isn't John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan. This is Parag Marathe, Jed York. They do not just throw out money, not that many teams do. But I can't imagine this being an easy negotiation.
No, I mean, and I can't either. And, they're in a little bit of a bind, in my opinion, because they have thrown out money, maybe, I think, a hair recklessly. I'll say that. I know I'm friends with John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan and a bunch of people out there, but, yeah, that's just my thought. The Brandon Ayuk thing, my thoughts on that. I thought that was too expensive for that player. They're paying George Kittle a ton of money, and he's coming towards the downslope of his career. Trent Williams is almost 40 at left tackle, and he was injured at the end of the year. Christian McCaffrey, a year and a half ago they gave big money to, and he's at an age of the running back and all that where you go, right? So they got some things to deal with there, definitely. And Brock Purdy being the biggest, to your point. And I don't know where it goes. But I know this, Mike, when it comes to the Brock Purdy conversation, I would pay him nowhere near market money. Nowhere near. My take on all of this. I mean, Tua's the perfect example. Nobody in football was going to give Tua $55 million. Nobody. The Miami Dolphins negotiated against themselves, and they put themselves in trouble. You can't have the highest paid guy on your football team be one of the biggest problems on your team in a big game, let alone he can't stay available for a big game anyways and on the field. Well, with the 49ers, Brock Purdy is a good quarterback, certainly. But we know, I think a lot of quarterbacks are going to San Francisco and look pretty good. He's what, a top 20-ish quarterback in football? Top 20? I mean, and to the point of where his contract is and what he's made to this moment, I mean, if I'm the 49ers, I'm offering like $30 million. I'm offering 25. I'm going, go ahead, tell me who else out there is going to give you that money and make you the starting quarterback somewhere. Right? Baker Mayfield's making 30. You're not even close to as good as Baker Mayfield. Sorry. Right? And that's where I think the rubber has to meet the road. At some point, one of these teams is going to have to go, just because he's our quarterback doesn't mean we have to make him one of the 5 highest paid guys in all of football. That's insane. It's ruining teams. Right? There's only a few short list guys that should be in that category. And they better be careful, in my opinion, with the Brock Purdy contract and that whole situation.
So there's actually a longer clip of this on YouTube. I would actually suggest you go look it up. And it's worth a listen because they just kind of go back and forth on this with more detail and even longer on it. But it's interesting to hear how critical Chris Sims is of Brock Purdy. I mean, you heard him say that he's almost definitively not better than Baker Mayfield. He should only be worth $25 million per year, and he's maybe the 20th best quarterback in the league, and all of these different types of things. And I understand that the opinions are pretty wide-ranging on Brock Purdy. I myself have never considered Brock to be an elite quarterback. For me to call someone elite, they need to be play elite over an extended period of time, and he just hasn't played long enough. I had said heading into this year, he could absolutely pop into that category with a phenomenal season. But as we know, it wasn't phenomenal. but also at the same time, it feels like people are just really overblowing like how the season went. I think because towards the end of the year, you had a couple games come down to the wire, and you had Brock Purdy throw a couple ill-advised, game, I guess, losing interceptions, which is not ideal and not good in any stretch of the imagination. But it does feel like it's kind of changed that like that's now the narrative. The narrative is he's just not a good quarterback, and he throws picks late in games, and I just don't believe that to be true. I think, effectively what I'm trying to say is that yes, in those moments that happened, that occurred. You can't take that away. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is that when you look at how those picks happened, and you look at kind of the sequencing of them and how they occurred, I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. I think you can improve those interceptions. So again, I feel like we live in a world where the outcome of a situation just automatically dictates what you are, and rightfully so. I understand, but I don't view it that way. I try to view it from a coach's perspective, or someone who looks at football through a developmental lens. And so when I look at mistakes, I don't look at it as like, oh, that's who you are. The first thing that I'm looking at is, can you correct that? Is it a function of physical limitation that you can't change? Is it a function of, man, this guy just makes the same mistake over and over again? Um, and I don't think that when you boil it down to how Brock played and some of the mistakes he had, is that it's that way. I think that each situation is kind of individual to itself. There were moments where he was absolutely pressing. Like when you look at that game against the Lions, he was on fire, and then just had this like weird overthrow over the middle that turned into an interception. And then he had another one like right after that. But if you really go back and you watch that film, there's maybe 4 or 5 passes the entire game that were bad, like considered below average throws. And even the interceptions, you're like, all right, well, we know Brock can throw uh, accurately over the middle. So would love to know what happened there. Because that's not a normal characteristic. That is abnormal of Brock to throw high over the middle like that. So the point being is that just because mistakes happen, it doesn't mean that this guy's just a terrible quarterback. See, it erases everything he had ever done. And I feel like that's the way people are talking about him, because it's easy to, because that's the last thing we saw. And that's the type of world that we live in. I've talked about it all season. I said and especially when we got towards the end, I said each individual game will be evaluated like it's its own individual season. And so however he performs in each individual game will be the narrative of the offseason. And he threw interceptions at the end of the game. And what is the narrative? He's not a good quarterback. He can't do this. He can't do that. Everyone's talking about him like he hasn't had any success. Like, and you listen to Chris Sims talk about it, and it's just like, dang, like, I get it. He isn't a Burrow, he isn't a Mahomes, he isn't a Lamar, and he's not one of those guys. We've always talked about that. He's not Superman, he's Batman. I just feel like there's a lot of just a lot of, I don't even know how to explain. Like, it almost feels like an overreaction. But anyways, in regards to those things, it's crystal clear that Chris is very critical of what he should be paid, how he should be paid. Believes that the 49ers absolutely are going to have a tough negotiation. I believe it's going to be a tough negotiation. I had said that from the very beginning. I don't know. We'll see how everything goes, but I'm curious how fans feel of basically hearing what we've heard from Brock, and then what we've heard from Kyle and John. And then you have these two guys who understand how these contracts go. Like, for me, I realize like I view contract negotiations, I think, much differently than your average fan. And I recognize when I talk from my perspective of what I think and how I'm perceiving things, I have to remember that because I have covered however many of these negotiations, I have been provided the information behind the scenes of what's really happening um, in real time of multiple negotiations. So I have a real like understanding of the reality of these negotiations. I recognize that's different than maybe the public perception of it. So when I listen to them, they're talking about the negotiation like I've been talking about the negotiation. They're talking about the negotiation through the lens of how I perceive the negotiation is going to go. So, but the thing about it is Chris is so critical of Brock in this situation that it's interesting. But I'm curious to know what you guys have to think of, what you guys think about this. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more updates.